was?
One of them, it was question 3.
Where's access? Let me hold on.
I think it was in the inventory, maybe. That one, it looks like the right one, but it was a funny little table that. And I put a star on it so I'd come back to class and I could ask, because I was taking a test the last time. Let me see if I can find it. Number 5. I've circled it, and that was in the quiz. Number 5, I think, is where I couldn't figure.
For chapter 5?
Yeah, but no, it's question number 5 on the quiz for chapter 7. The inventory.
Quiz access or the quiz?
I think it's the actual quiz, but there was a similar one, I think, in quiz access, but I can't find that number. But I did circle it in the quiz.
Okay, well, let's see if it's there. Number 5.
I think it goes, yeah, the accounts receivable not collected, they estimated 35 was uncollectible. And it's where you do the year-end adjusting entry and then compute the realizable value of the accounts receivable reported at the year-end balance sheet. And then on the second year, it writes off a customer's account for 400, compute the net realizable value of accounts receivable on January 1st after the write-off. And I tried every different way I could think of, and I never did come up with the right way.
Yeah, I had a question on this one before, and it is a little tricky conceptually, because this is just different numbers, but same concept. They always do that on these quizzes. They have the same question, but just different numbers. So
right.
So you have $5,300 in receivables, right? But $2,300 of it is assumed to be uncollectible. So that effectively means that you have right here you can see it. 5,300 minus 2,300 gives you a $50,700 real net realizable value for the accounts receivable, right? And that's before any write-offs. Well, there were no write-offs, well, necessarily, but even after any write-offs, what ends up happening, even after the write-off, right? You take $300 write-off, the balance for the accounts receivable comes down because you've actually written it off. You've forever in the future not receiving, right? So your balance in AR goes down by 300, but then effectively your allowance for doubtful accounts goes down by 300 as well, because the entry is to reduce the uncollectible amount by the same.
So it's a 53 in the first instance. They had the 53 in accounts receivable. And then they said they knew 23 was uncollectible. So right off the bat, that's the first answer. And I think I got that one right, no problem. Yeah. Because that's what I did. I took, on my case, it was 65 minus 35, and I got the right answer before. So I got that figured out.
Yep.
And then I tried it several different ways, which I thought, so after the write-off, so do you take, where did you come up? That's what I couldn't figure out. It says after the write-off, I'm starting with 52.7, and I ended with, before the write-off, I had 50,700. How do we get to the 50? Oh, it was the 53 minus.
Yeah, so you're
just
taking
the 300. Oh.
Yeah, you're taking 300 off of this number. And so now your AR balance is 52.7 in this case. But effectively, then you're reducing your allowance as well. And so it goes down. So, the journal entry effectively, I don't want this. Let's see if I can get it.
So then where did the 2,000 come from? So I got the 3,000. Oops.
Yeah, so in this case, your AR balance, let's see, balance is 5,300, 53,000. And then the allowance is 2,700, right? So your net value is the difference between these two.
That was the first, right before the write-off.
Yeah, before the write-off. So let me just make sure. Yeah. So, why do I have a different number? It's because 53 minus 2,300.
So yeah, well, the 53, okay.
So these are the two values you're starting out with, right? 53 in AR plus 2,300 in allowances. So your net number is 50,700, which is consistent with this number, right?
Right.
Then when you do the write-off, right, I'm just going to do this in shorthand, basically, without all the journal entries. You're going to subtract, whoops, you're going to subtract 300 here, but you're also going to effectively subtract 300 here. So
Oh,
you're,
twice.
yeah, well, not really twice, but I'll show you how the journal entry works after.
Oh, I see, because it's a different area. Okay.
Yeah, because
That's
it has,
where I couldn't figure out where did they get that different number, and I could not figure it out. So they took it right off the top number. I kept wanting to take it off the net number. I think is where I got in trouble.
yeah, so, I mean, I'm just showing these in absolute values, right? So equals some, and then, oops, not that, plus that minus that. So the numbers are the same before and after, right? Now the journal entry ends up being something more like, your account, your debit, and your credit, right? So you're on your, and let's call this a description. So write off, and you're going to go from a allowance and then your AR. These are your two accounts. So you're going to debit the 300 here and you're going to credit the 300 there. The allowance is a contra account, so a debit to it ends up being a negative, and AR is an asset account, so a credit to it ends up being a negative, right? So
So
that's
it's the
why you
same.
end up seeing it's just a transfer between the asset accounts, because when you're doing the allowance, when you initially set up the allowance at some point, it would be, allowance for bad debt. I'll just call it allowance. I won't. When you set up the allowance, you're going to do bad debts here, and you're going to do allowances here. And it was originally set up for something like this. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Right. So the contra account, the allowances is in the contra account because it's a credit balance. And so when you do this entry here, it reduces that balance down to the 3,000, 2,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the right answer was just the same for both.
Yeah.
Is that right? When it
Yeah, it's
came
a bit
down
of
to
a
it,
trick
because
question because it's just checking your understanding of how these two, really these four different accounts work. Because in when you set up an allowance, you don't directly write off the AR balance to the income statement. You just apply it to the allowance balance, and then you're always reevaluating what the allowance should be, and then make an adjustment from there.
and I think I understood that finally when I was going through it, but I could not remember it when I
Yeah,
got to the,
yeah. So this is
because
the
then they knew
allowance.
what they knew they did an estimate. So this way I understand. So the first was just an estimate, but when it came time for write-off, they had an actual amount that they knew at that
Yeah,
point, and it became the write-off of the 300.
right, right.
And so it, okay. But how does it still, I guess I'm just trying to see how it still ended up the same, because we took the
Because
23 and then we're doing opposite numbers and it's staying the same.
yeah, so these are your balances before the actual write-off,
Okay.
right? And then this number ends up being this number.
And I see that they're offsetting. Okay, they're offsetting.
Yeah, and so just different numbers in different places, but the trick is that these are both negatives because they're reducing the balances of each. And the reason why they're reducing them is because of how these accounts work. This is a normal credit balance, is a contra account, and AR is a normal debit balance type of an account, an asset account.
All right, that was my one tricky one that I've had a hard time getting in my brain. So
Definitely a trick. Yeah. Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, ooh, yeah, that's a little bit of a mind bender because you wouldn't necessarily anticipate it being the same, but because it's an allowance method, it ends up being the same because you're just moving money from one account on the asset on the balance sheet side to another account.
okay. Is that going to be on our test? Do I have to go back and really?
I am sure the differences between the allowance method and the direct write-off method will be on the account on the exam.
That's what I thought. I thought I need to get this down because I think it's tricky going between the accounts, just between the estimated and the actual. I found that kind of tricky in that chapter anyway, to know
Yeah.
which one to use, whether it's
Yeah.
bad debts or whether it was allowances.
Yeah. Anytime you have an allowance account, effectively you're using the allowance method, right? And so, and a lot of companies do that because they first look at their AR balances and they try to estimate what they think the actual amount collectible will be, or the amount that they're going to end up writing off will be. And then they'll make the allowance at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter or whatever period of time that they're doing it. So that then when they actually do the write-offs, they're just going between the accounts and not directly to the income statement. So the income statement is just all estimated values, and the balance sheet ends up being all your actuals. The other way is just to do a direct write-off. Whenever it happens, you just go directly to the income statement and you ignore the allowance account. So anytime there's an allowance count, you know that they're using the allowance method.
Okay.
And so in this is the allowance method, right? Allowance method. The direct write-off method, I'll just call it method, direct method, would basically be this one. Put that over here. We'll just bring these over here. So it would just be, instead of allowance, this would be bad debt.
Under direct method, it's just, yeah, it
It's
goes
just
direct.
coming right off your account receivable balance. It's a credit, it's reducing your balance in the AR, and it's going directly to bad debt, which is an income statement account. Right. And so it's got a normal, it's an expense, and so it's got a normal debit balance.
Yeah, that's a chapter I think I need to study up on a little bit more before I take the exam, because that kind of is tricky. But the majority of them, it seemed like, were the allowance method. That direct was very few and far between.
Yeah, the direct is used for smaller businesses that don't necessarily worry about maintaining I don't know, a matching principal type of revenue and expense accounting method. You'll see this more than often on larger businesses.
Oh, that's fun. Okay. All right, that was my main glitcher.